The dust devil twisted across Main Street in Oroville, California, carrying with it the scent of sage and broken dreams, and Victoria Jane Foster watched it through the window of the general store, her heart as unsettled as the wind itself. It was the summer of 1878, and the gold rush fever had mostly died down, leaving behind a town that clung to existence through sheer stubbornness and the determination of folks who had nowhere else to go. Victoria had arrived 3 months earlier with her uncle's family. Her own parents lost to fever back in Missouri. At 22 years old, she had learned that life gave you what it wanted to give you, not what you hoped for, and you made peace with it, or you drowned in sorrow. She adjusted the bolts of fabric on the shelf, making sure each edge lined up perfectly. Her aunt, a practical woman with sharp eyes and sharper words, insisted that everything in the store be kept immaculate. Victoria did not mind the work. It kept her hands busy and her mind from wandering to places that brought nothing but pain. The bell above the door chimed, and she turned to greet the customer. A man stepped inside, tall and lean in the way of someone who spent their days on horseback. He wore dusty brown trousers and a shirt that had once been white, with a vest that had seen better years. His hat shadowed his face, but when he lifted it in greeting, she saw eyes the color of creek water in springtime, clear and surprisingly gentle. "Afternoon, miss," he said, his voice carrying the slow drawl of Texas. "I'm looking for leather working supplies, needles mostly and waxed thread if you have it." Victoria nodded and moved toward the back shelves where such items were kept. "We have both. Are you new to town?" "Passing through, really. My horse threw a shoe about 5 miles out and I walked her in slow. The blacksmith said he could have her fixed up by tomorrow morning." He followed her to the back of the store, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Carter Patterson." "Victoria Foster," she replied, selecting several packets of needles from the wooden box. "The thread is just here. How much do you need?" "Enough to repair a saddle and maybe a bridle. I've been hard on my gear lately." She gathered the supplies and carried them to the counter. As she tallied the cost, she felt his eyes on her, not in an uncomfortable way, but with an open curiosity that most folks did not bother with anymore. People in Oroville had become weathered and cautious, their warmth reserved for those they had known for years. "That will be $1.30, she said. Carter reached into his pocket and counted out the coins carefully. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who worked hard for everything they had. As he placed the money in her palm, their fingers brushed briefly and something unexpected flickered in her chest, quick as summer lightning. She pulled her hand back and wrapped his purchases in brown paper, tying them with string. "There you are, Mr. Patterson. I hope your repairs go well." "Just Carter, please." He took the package and smiled at her, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Would it be too forward to ask if you might take a walk with me this evening? I don't know anyone in town, and it would be nice to have some company." Victoria felt warmth rise to her cheeks. It had been a long time since anyone had asked such a thing. "That's kind of you, but I should tell you something first, so you don't waste your time." She drew a breath, steadying herself. "My heart is spoken for. I'm engaged to a man back in Missouri. He's settling his affairs there, and then I'll be returning to marry him." The words came out practiced, smooth. She had said them before to other men who had shown interest. It was easier this way, cleaner. The truth was more complicated, as truth always was, but simple explanations saved everyone time and trouble. Carter's expression did not change much, just a slight softening around his eyes. He did not look disappointed or angry, the way some men did when rejected. Instead, he adjusted his package under his arm and nodded slowly. "Then I will be your friend instead," he said, his voice steady and sincere. Always. Everyone needs friends, and I meant what I said about not knowing anyone here. If you would like company that expects nothing more than conversation and perhaps a shared meal now and then, I would be honored. Victoria looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw no guile in his face, no hidden agenda lurking behind polite words. She had become good at reading people during her time working in the store, watching how they held themselves, listening to what they did not say as much as what they did. Carter Patterson seemed exactly what he claimed to be, a stranger in town looking for simple human connection. "All right," she said quietly. "I finish work at 6 o'clock. There's a path behind the church that leads to a little grove of cottonwood trees. It's cooler there in the evening." "I'll meet you there at 6, Carter said. He tipped his hat again and turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Thank you, Victoria. I look forward to it." After he left, Victoria stood at the counter for a long moment, her hands resting on the worn wood. Her aunt came down from the upstairs living quarters carrying a basket of mending. "Who was that?" Aunt Margaret asked, settling into her chair by the window where the light was best for stitching. "A traveler. His horse needed shoeing. He bought some leather working supplies. He seemed to spend a lot of time talking for just a customer." Victoria began reorganizing the counter, though it did not need it. He was just being friendly. Her aunt made a non-committal sound and focused on her needle. Margaret Foster was not an unkind woman, but she believed in propriety and proper behavior above all else. She had taken Victoria in out of duty to her dead brother, and she made sure Victoria understood the weight of that obligation. The afternoon passed slowly. Victoria helped several more customers, swept the floor, and restocked the shelves from the storage room. Her mind kept drifting to the man with the creek water eyes and his simple, honest offer of friendship. She had not had a real friend since coming to California. Her cousins were younger and viewed her more as a servant than family. The other young women in town had their own established circles, and Victoria had neither the time nor the energy to push her way into them. At 6 o'clock, she untied her apron and hung it on the peg by the back door. Her aunt glanced up from her mending. "Where are you going?" "Just for a walk." "I have been inside all day. Be back before dark. It is not proper for young women to wander around after sunset." "Yes, Aunt Margaret." Victoria slipped out the back door and made her way down the alley between the store and the barber shop. The church stood at the end of Main Street, its white paint peeling in the harsh sun. The path she had mentioned to Carter ran along the side of the building and meandered through scrub brush and wild grass, until it reached a small grove where cottonwood trees clustered around a seasonal creek, mostly dry this time of year. Carter was already there, sitting on a flat rock near the largest tree. He stood when he saw her, and she noticed he had washed his face and hands and changed into a cleaner shirt. "I was not sure you would come," he said. "I said I would. People say a lot of things." They began walking slowly along the creek bed, their footsteps crunching on the dry earth. The evening air was cooler, and birds called from the branches above them. For a while, neither spoke, and Victoria found the silence comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, Carter said, "Tell me about Missouri." She had expected questions about her fiancé, the usual polite inquiries people made. The directness of his question caught her off guard. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me. I have never been that far east." So she told him about the rolling hills and the thick forests, so different from the dry expanse of California. She described the farm where she had grown up, the smell of her mother's bread baking, the sound of her father's laughter. She talked about the fever that had taken them both within days of each other, how quickly everything had changed. Carter listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he simply nodded. "Loss like that changes a person." "It does," she agreed. "What about you? Where are you from? Texas, originally. Near San Antonio. My father had a small ranch, cattle mostly. He died when I was 16 and my mother followed a year later. I sold the ranch because I could not manage it alone, and I have been moving around ever since. He picked up a smooth stone and tossed it gently from hand to hand. I do leather work, fix saddles, make holsters and belts. It keeps me fed and gives me a reason to see new places. Do you like it? Moving around all the time, he considered the question carefully. I thought I did. Lately, though, I have been thinking it might be nice to settle somewhere. Put down roots, maybe start a proper leather working shop instead of just doing repairs out of a saddle bag. They walked until the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Victoria knew she needed to get back before her aunt started worrying, or more accurately, before her aunt started asking questions she did not want to answer. I should go, she said reluctantly. Can we do this again? Tomorrow, maybe? She knew she should say no. Spending time with Carter, even as friends, felt dangerous somehow, like standing too close to the edge of something she could not quite see. But the afternoon had been the most peaceful she had felt in months, and the thought of going back to her small room above the store, to the endless repetition of the same tasks day after day, made her chest feel tight. Tomorrow, she agreed. Same time. Over the next week, Victoria and Carter fell into a routine. She would finish work, and they would walk through the cottonwood grove or sit on the rocks by the creek bed and talk. He told her about the places he had been, from the humid bayous of Louisiana to the high mountains of Colorado. She told him about her dreams of becoming a teacher someday, of having a little schoolhouse where children could learn to read and write. "Why did you not pursue that?" Carter asked one evening. "My parents died and I had no money. My uncle offered to take me in, but only if I worked in the store. There was no time or funds for teacher training." "What about your fiancé? Could he not help?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. She had been dreading this question, knowing it would come eventually. The lie she had told weighed on her more each day she spent with Carter. He had been nothing but honest with her, and she had built their friendship on a deception. "Carter, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not actually have a fiancé." He turned to look at her, surprise clear on his face. "You do not?" "There was a man back in Missouri. His name was Robert. We were courting and everyone expected we would marry. But after my parents died, he changed his mind. He said he could not take on a wife with no dowry, no family to contribute to our future." She wrapped her arms around herself, remembering the humiliation of that conversation. "I was devastated, and then I was angry. When I came here, I decided it was easier to tell people I was engaged. That way, no one would bother me, and I would not have to explain what happened." Carter was silent for a long moment, and Victoria felt her heart pounding. She had just admitted to lying to him, to everyone in town. He had every right to be angry, to walk away and never speak to her again. Instead, he reached over and gently took her hand. "I am sorry that happened to you." "Robert sounds like a fool." She felt tears prick her eyes. "You are not angry that I lied. You protected yourself the only way you knew how. I understand that." He squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for trusting me with the truth." Something shifted between them in that moment. The barrier Victoria had carefully maintained, the invisible line that marked Carter as just a friend, began to blur. She found herself noticing things she had tried not to see before, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the strength in his hands, the kindness in his eyes when he looked at her. She pulled her hand away, suddenly frightened by the intensity of what she felt. "It is getting late." "I should go." "Victoria, wait." Carter stood, his expression serious. I need to tell you something too. I know I said I would be your friend and I meant it. I still mean it. But I need you to know that my feelings have become more than friendship. I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Victoria felt like she could not breathe. "I am not asking you to feel the same way," Carter continued. "I am not asking you for anything. I just could not keep pretending that what I feel is only friendship. You deserve honesty after giving me yours." "Carter, I cannot," she whispered. "I cannot let myself love you. You are leaving as soon as your work here is finished. You said yourself you are just passing through. I could stay. If I had a reason to stay, I would." "No." Victoria shook her head, panic rising in her chest. "No, you cannot give up your life for me. We have only known each other a week. That is not enough." "How much time is enough? I have met people I knew for years and never truly saw them. I have known you for 7 days, and I feel like I see you more clearly than I have ever seen anyone. Please do not do this." She took a step back, then another. "I need to think. I need time." She turned and ran, her skirts catching on the brush as she hurried back toward town. Behind her, she heard Carter call her name, but she did not stop. She could not stop, because if she stopped, if she turned around, she knew she would fall into his arms and damn the consequences. That night, Victoria lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of her aunt and uncle settling in for the night. She had built such careful walls around her heart after Robert's rejection, promising herself she would never be that vulnerable again. Carter had somehow slipped past all those defenses without her even noticing, and now she was terrified. What if she let herself love him and he changed his mind like Robert had? What if she was not enough again? The thought of surviving that kind of pain twice felt impossible. But another voice whispered in her mind, quieter but persistent. What if he meant what he said? What if this was real? For 3 days, Victoria avoided the Cottonwood Grove. She stayed in the store after closing, finding tasks that did not need doing, or she went straight to her room and claimed a headache. Her aunt noticed the change but said nothing, which was somehow worse than questions would have been. On the 4th day, Carter came to the store. He waited until Victoria was alone at the counter, her aunt occupied with helping another customer in the back. "You do not have to run from me," he said quietly. "I told you I would be your friend always. I meant that too. If friendship is all you can give me, then that is what we will have." Victoria felt tears threaten. "How can we go back to being friends after what you said? Because I care more about having you in my life in whatever way you will allow than I do about my own feelings. Your comfort, your happiness, they matter more to me than what I want." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why would you do that?" "Because that is what love is, Victoria. It is not just wanting someone when it is convenient or when they can give you something in return. It is wanting their happiness even when it means setting aside your own desires." She closed her eyes, fighting against the sob building in her throat. "I am so afraid." "I know. And I am not asking you not to be afraid. I am just asking you not to run." When she opened her eyes, he was looking at her with such tenderness that something inside her cracked open, all the carefully constructed walls crumbling at once. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I have been trying so hard not to, but I am." Carter's face transformed, joy spreading across his features like sunrise. "Then we will figure out the rest together. We do not have to have all the answers right now." "What about your traveling, your work?" "I meant what I said before. I have been thinking about settling down, finding a place to build something permanent. If that place is here in Oroville with you, then that is exactly where I want to be. What if I am making a mistake? What if I am not good at this, at loving someone?" Carter reached across the counter and took both her hands in his. Then, We will make mistakes together and figure out how to fix them. That is what two people do when they care about each other. The bell above the door chimed as another customer entered, and they stepped apart. But the connection between them remained, invisible but solid, a promise of something neither of them fully understood yet, but both were willing to explore. That evening, Victoria told her aunt she was going for a walk. Margaret looked up from her mending, her sharp eyes missing nothing. With that young man, I suppose. Victoria felt her cheeks warm. Yes. Is he staying in Oroville? He is considering it. Her aunt set down her sewing and looked at Victoria for a long moment. Your uncle and I have given you a home here, Victoria. We have asked for nothing but honest work in return. I hope you remember your obligations before making any rash decisions. I do remember, Aunt Margaret. I am grateful for everything you have done for me. Gratitude is shown through actions, not words. Remember that. Victoria nodded and hurried out before her aunt could say more. The conversation had been predictable, but it still left a sour taste in her mouth. She knew her aunt and uncle viewed her as obligated to them, perhaps permanently. The thought of trying to build a life with Carter while under that weight felt daunting. Carter was waiting at the cottonwood grove, and when she reached him, he pulled her into his arms. She let herself lean against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. I spoke to the blacksmith today, Carter said, his hand gently stroking her hair. He mentioned that the saddle maker who used to work in town died last winter. There has been no one to fill that role since. I could set up a shop, do leather working, saddle making, and repair. There is a small building next to the livery stable that is sitting empty. The owner said he would rent it to me for a fair price. Victoria pulled back to look at him. You have already started planning this. I wanted to show you I am serious. This is not just a whim or empty words. I want to build a life here. Carter, my aunt expects me to keep working at the store. She made that very clear just now. I do not know how we could make this work. Then we will figure it out. Maybe you work at the store during the day and we see each other in the evenings. Maybe, eventually, when my business is established, you would not need to work there anymore. Maybe you could pursue that teaching dream you told me about. Those are a lot of maybes. Life is always maybes, Victoria. The only certainty is that we face them together or we face them alone. I would rather face them with you. She kissed him then, rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. It was tender and sweet, filled with promise and hope and just a little bit of fear. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. I would rather face them with you too, she said. Over the next month, Carter rented the building by the livery and began setting up his leather working shop. Victoria helped him in the evenings, sweeping out the dust and cobwebs, arranging his tools on the workbench he built from salvaged lumber. The work was hard, but they did it side by side, talking and laughing, and Victoria felt happier than she had in years. Her aunt grew increasingly cold as it became clear Victoria's relationship with Carter was serious. Uncle Thomas, a quieter man who usually let his wife handle family matters, pulled Victoria aside one evening. Margaret is upset because she worries about what will happen to the store if you leave, he said. We are not getting any younger and the work is hard. She counted on having your help for years to come. I have not said I am leaving, Uncle Thomas, but you are thinking about it. I can see it in your eyes. You have that look young people get when they are planning a future that does not include the past. He sighed and rubbed his weathered face. I am not saying you should not have your own life, Victoria. I am just asking that you give us time to make other arrangements. Do not leave us without help. Guilt settled heavy in Victoria's stomach. I would never do that. You took me in when I had nowhere else to go. I will make sure you have help before I make any changes. But finding help proved difficult. Oroville was a small town, and most young people with ambition left for bigger cities. The ones who stayed had their own work and families. Victoria placed advertisements and asked everyone who came into the store, but no one suitable appeared. Meanwhile, Carter's business began to grow. Word spread that there was a skilled leather worker in town again, and customers came from surrounding areas with saddles to repair, belts to make, holsters to craft. He worked long hours, but he always made time for Victoria, even if it was just an hour in the evening to sit together and talk. One night in late October, Carter asked her to meet him at the shop after closing time. When she arrived, she found candles lit throughout the small space, casting dancing shadows on the walls. He had spread a blanket on the floor with a simple meal of bread, cheese, and apples. "What is all this?" she asked, delighted. "I realized we have never had a proper dinner together, just the two of us. I wanted to do something special." They sat on the blanket and ate, and Carter told her about a large order he had received from a ranch owner north of town. "It is enough work to keep me busy for months, and the pay is good. I have been saving money, Victoria. I have been thinking about the future." "What kind of future?" He set down his food and took her hands. "I want to marry you. I know we have not known each other long by some standards, but I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in my life. I love you, and I want to build a life with you." Victoria felt joy and terror war within her chest. "I want that too. But my aunt and uncle still need help at the store, and I cannot just abandon them. What if we hired someone? I could contribute money toward their wages until your aunt and uncle find a permanent solution." "You would do that, Victoria. I would do almost anything to make you happy. If helping your family is important to you, then it is important to me." She kissed him, putting all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, I will marry you." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, dreaming about the little house they would find, the life they would create together. Victoria felt like she was floating, dizzy with happiness and possibility. But when she told her aunt and uncle the next morning, the conversation did not go as she had hoped. "Absolutely not," Margaret said, her face flushed with anger. "You have only known this man for 2 months. 2 months, and you want to marry him and leave us with no help. Carter has offered to help pay for someone to replace me until you find a permanent solution." "We do not need his charity," Margaret snapped. "What we need is for you to honor your obligations to this family. We took you in when you had nothing, Victoria. Nothing. And this is how you repay us." Uncle Thomas put a hand on his wife's arm. "Margaret, calm down. Do not tell me to calm down. She is being selfish and ungrateful." Victoria felt tears sting her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. "I am grateful for everything you have done. I have worked hard for you every day since I arrived, and I am not trying to leave you in a difficult position. I am trying to find a solution that works for everyone. The solution is simple. You stay here and do your duty." "For how long?" "Forever. I am 22 years old, Aunt Margaret. I have a right to my own life. You have a right to the life we have given you, which is more than you would have had otherwise." The argument went in circles until Victoria, emotionally exhausted, fled to her room. She lay on her bed and sobbed, all her joy from the previous evening shattered. She heard her aunt and uncle arguing downstairs, their voices muffled but heated. Later that afternoon, Uncle Thomas came up to her room. He sat heavily on the chair by her small window. "Your aunt is frightened," he said quietly. "She is not good at showing it, but she is scared of what will happen when we are too old to run the store anymore. We have no children of our own, and this business is all we have. The thought of losing both it and you at the same time is overwhelming for her." "I understand that, Uncle Thomas. But I cannot give up my entire life out of fear of what might happen in the future." I know, and that is fair, but perhaps you could give us a little more time, not forever, just a few months to truly search for help and to let Margaret adjust to the idea. Victoria wiped her eyes. How much time? 6 months. By then, spring will be here, and it is always easier to find workers in the spring. It would give Carter time to establish his business more firmly too, so you would be starting your marriage on solid ground. 6 months felt like an eternity, but Victoria could see the wisdom in her uncle's words. Carter's business was still new, and having more money saved before they married would make things easier. And perhaps with time her aunt would soften. All right, she agreed. 6 months. But after that, I am marrying Carter whether you have help or not. Uncle Thomas nodded. That is fair. When Victoria told Carter about the delay that evening, she was afraid he would be angry or disappointed. Instead, he pulled her close and kissed her forehead. 6 months gives us time to plan properly, to save money, to do this right, he said. I am not going anywhere, Victoria. I will wait as long as it takes. Those 6 months tested them in ways Victoria had not anticipated. Her aunt remained cold and distant, making sharp comments whenever Carter's name was mentioned. The work at the store felt heavier, burdened by resentment and guilt. But Carter remained steady, patient, always there at the end of each difficult day with kind words and warm embraces. He used the time well, expanding his business and building a solid reputation throughout the area. He found a small house on the edge of town, 2 rooms that needed work but had good bones. They spent their evenings there, fixing the roof, replacing broken windows, painting the walls. It was exhausting work, but it was theirs, and that made every blister and aching muscle worthwhile. In March, a young woman named Sarah arrived in Oroville, looking for work. She was 18, newly arrived from Nevada, and needed employment. Victoria brought her to meet her aunt, and after a trial period, Margaret grudgingly admitted that Sarah was a good worker. The pieces were falling into place. Carter and Victoria set their wedding date for the last Saturday in April. It would be a simple ceremony in the church, with just a few friends and Victoria's aunt and uncle. Carter had no family to invite, and Victoria's extended family was all back east. They did not need a big celebration. They just needed each other. The night before the wedding, Victoria sat in her small room above the store for the last time. Her few possessions were packed in a trunk, ready to be moved to the house she would share with Carter. She heard a soft knock on her door and was surprised to find her aunt standing there. Margaret looked older than Victoria remembered, the lines around her eyes and mouth deeper. She held something wrapped in tissue paper. I wanted to give you this, Margaret said, her voice lacking its usual sharpness. She handed Victoria the package. Inside was a beautiful lace handkerchief, delicate and intricate. It was my mother's, Margaret explained. She carried it on her wedding day, and so did I. I thought you might like to have it. Victoria felt tears well up. Aunt Margaret, I do not know what to say. I have not been kind to you these past months. I let my fear make me cruel, and I am sorry for that. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. Thomas told me I was behaving badly, that I was letting my own worries poison what should be a happy time for you. He was right. You were worried about your future. That is understandable. It is understandable, but it was not fair to put that burden on you. You have worked hard and done everything we asked of you. You deserve to be happy, Victoria. You deserve to have the life you want. Victoria sat beside her aunt and took her hand. Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. This Carter, he is a good man, the best man I have ever known. Margaret nodded slowly. Then I am glad you found him, and I am sorry it took me so long to say so. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, and Victoria felt some of the weight she had been carrying lift from her shoulders. Her aunt was not perfect, and their relationship would probably always have complicated edges, but this moment of understanding was a gift she had not expected. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring morning that felt like a blessing. Victoria wore a simple dress of pale blue that she and Carter had picked out together from fabric at the store. She carried her great-grandmother's handkerchief and a small bouquet of wildflowers that Carter had picked for her that morning. The church was small, filled with the few friends they had made in town. Carter stood at the altar in his best clothes, and when Victoria walked down the aisle and saw the love shining in his eyes, she felt like the luckiest person in the world. The reverend kept the ceremony short and sweet. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to love each other through whatever came, to be partners in all things, to face the future together. When Carter kissed her as his wife, Victoria felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The small gathering afterward was held at the house Carter and Victoria had fixed up together. There was food and laughter, and even Aunt Margaret managed to smile. As the sun began to set and their guests started leaving, Carter pulled Victoria into his arms. "Hello, Mrs. Patterson," he said, grinning. "Hello, Mr. Patterson," she replied, her heart full to bursting. They spent their wedding night in their little house, learning each other in new and intimate ways. Carter was gentle and patient, making sure Victoria felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Victoria traced the scars on his hands with her fingertips. "Tell me what you are thinking," Carter said softly. "I am thinking about how close I came to never having this. If I had not lied about having a fiancé, if you had not offered to be my friend anyway, if I had not finally been brave enough to let myself love you, there were so many moments when this could have gone differently. But it did not. We are here now, and that is what matters. Do you ever worry about the future? About whether we can make this work?" Carter rolled onto his side to face her, his hand cupping her cheek. "Of course I worry sometimes. Everyone worries. But then I remember that we have already faced challenges and come through them together. We will keep doing that one day at a time." Victoria kissed him, slow and deep. "I love you so much. I love you too, always." Their first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to share space and make decisions together, navigating the small conflicts that arose when two people tried to merge their lives. But they talked through every difficulty, never letting problems fester. They worked during the day, Carter at his shop and Victoria occasionally still helping at the store when Sarah needed time off, and they came together each evening to share meals and conversation and the simple pleasure of each other's company. In the fall, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but waited to be sure before telling Carter. When she finally shared the news, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." They spent that winter preparing, Carter building a cradle from smooth oak and Victoria sewing tiny clothes. They argued over names, laughing at each other's suggestions, until they finally agreed that if it was a boy, they would call him James after Carter's father, and if it was a girl, she would be Alina after Victoria's mother. The baby came in early May, and it was a boy. James Carter Patterson arrived after a long labor that left Victoria exhausted, but elated. Carter cried when he held his son for the first time, and Victoria fell in love with both of them all over again. Being parents was harder than either had imagined. James was colicky and did not sleep well, leaving both of them exhausted and short-tempered. They snapped at each other over small things, stress and sleeplessness fraying their patience. But they always apologized, always came back together, remembering that they were on the same team. When James was 3 months old, something shifted. He started sleeping longer stretches, smiling more, becoming a little person rather than just a demanding bundle of needs. Carter would hold him in the evenings and tell him stories about all the places he had traveled, and Victoria would watch them together, her heart so full it hurt. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset with James asleep between them, Carter said, "Do you remember when you told me your heart was spoken for?" Victoria laughed softly. "I remember. And I remember you saying you would be my friend instead always. Best decision I ever made. Being your friend opened the door to everything else, to this whole life we have built." "I am glad I lied to you," Victoria said, then corrected herself with a smile. "Actually, I am glad you saw through my lie and offered me friendship anyway. You gave me something I did not even know I needed." "We gave each other that, I think. We both needed someone to see us clearly and care about us anyway." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. James made small sleeping sounds, and Victoria felt such contentment that it seemed almost impossible. This was what happiness looked like. Not some grand adventure or dramatic gesture, but this quiet moment with the people she loved most. The years passed, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. James grew into a curious, energetic toddler who loved following his father around the shop. When he was 3, Victoria became pregnant again, and this time they had a daughter they named Alina, just as they had planned years before. Alina was easier than James had been, a calm baby who smiled at everything. James was fascinated by his little sister, always wanting to hold her and show her his toys. Carter expanded his shop, hiring an apprentice to help with the growing business. Victoria finally pursued her dream of teaching, starting with just a few children in their home a few mornings a week. Aunt Margaret softened considerably as she aged, often stopping by to visit the children and bring small gifts. She and Victoria never discussed their difficult past, but there was an understanding between them now, a mutual respect that had been hard-won but was real nonetheless. When James was 7 and Alina was 4, Victoria started a proper school in a small building the town had erected for that purpose. She had 10 students that first year, children from Oroville and the surrounding farms. She loved teaching, watching young minds bloom and grow, giving them opportunities she had once only dreamed of for herself. Carter's business thrived, and he became known throughout Northern California for his quality work. He trained 3 apprentices over the years, passing on his skills to the next generation. But no matter how busy he got, he always made time for his family, for the evening walks with Victoria, for playing with the children, for the quiet moments that made life worth living. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Carter surprised Victoria with a trip to San Francisco, just the two of them. James and Alina stayed with Aunt Margaret, who despite her advanced age insisted she was perfectly capable of managing 2 children for a few days. In San Francisco, Carter and Victoria walked along the wharves, ate at restaurants, and spent their evenings in a hotel room that seemed impossibly luxurious after their simple life in Oroville. On their last night, they sat on the balcony watching ships come into the harbor. "Are you happy?" Carter asked, pulling Victoria close against his side. "Incredibly happy. You? More than I ever thought possible. Sometimes I think about that day I walked into the general store and saw you standing there. I had no idea that moment would change my entire life." "I was so determined not to let anyone close," Victoria said. "I had built such high walls around my heart, but you were so patient, so kind. You did not try to tear down my walls. You just waited until I was ready to lower them myself. I would have waited forever if that was what you needed." Victoria turned to kiss him, tasting salt air and love on his lips. "I am so glad I did not make you wait that long." They returned to Oroville renewed, ready to dive back into their busy lives. James started helping more in his father's shop, showing an aptitude for leather working that made Carter beam with pride. Eleanor discovered a love of reading and could often be found curled up with a book, lost in faraway worlds. When Victoria was 35, she became pregnant again, a surprise that shocked both her and Carter. The pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and the birth was difficult. But when it was over, they had a healthy baby boy they named Thomas, after Victoria's uncle who had been kinder to her than she had sometimes acknowledged. Thomas was a sweet child, gentle and thoughtful. James, now 13, was protective of his little brother. Eleanor, 10 years old, treated Thomas like her own living doll, always wanting to hold him and play with him. The years continued to flow, each one marked by birthdays and holidays, by challenges met and overcome, by small joys accumulated into a life well lived. Carter's hair turned silver at the temples, and Victoria found laugh lines settling around her eyes. They wore their age as badges of honor, proof that they had lived and loved and built something real. When James turned 18, he announced he wanted to take over the leather working business someday, but first, he wanted to travel like his father had. Carter understood this need, this desire to see the world before settling down, and he gave James his blessing. James set out in the spring with a good horse, a well-made saddle created by his father, and letters of introduction to leather workers throughout the West. Eleanor, at 15, was already talking about becoming a teacher like her mother. She helped Victoria at the school, showing remarkable patience with the younger children. Thomas, now 8, was still trying to figure out what he wanted to be, but he had time. On a warm evening in June, Carter and Victoria celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Their children, along with friends and neighbors, gathered for a party in the yard behind their house, which had been expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. As the sun set and people began dancing to the music from a small group of musicians, Carter took Victoria's hand and led her away from the crowd, down the familiar path toward the cottonwood grove, where they had first walked together all those years ago. The trees were bigger now, their branches spreading wide and green. The creek bed, dry most of the year, had water running through it from recent rain. They sat on the same flat rock where Carter had waited for Victoria that first evening. 25 years, Victoria said, leaning her head on Carter's shoulder. It feels like a lifetime and like no time at all. I would not change a single moment, Carter said. Well, maybe the sleepless nights when James was a baby, but everything else was perfect. Victoria laughed. Liar. We have had hard times too, but we made it through them all. Because we had each other. That first day when I told you I would be your friend instead, always, I meant it, and I kept that promise. You have always been my best friend, Victoria, even after you became my wife. You kept your promise, she agreed. You have been my friend through everything, the good and the bad. That is why our love has lasted. It is built on friendship as much as passion. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the faint sound of music and laughter from the party. After a while, Carter said, I have been thinking about the future. What about it? James will take over the business eventually, and Eleanor will have her teaching career. Thomas will find his path. We have done our job as parents, but what about us? What do we want for the next chapter of our lives? Victoria considered the question. I want to keep teaching as long as I am able. I want to watch our children build their own lives. I want to meet our grandchildren someday. And I want to keep walking through this grove with you, talking about everything and nothing, for as many years as we have left. That sounds perfect to me. They walked back to the party hand in hand, and Victoria thought about how miraculous it was that something that had started with a lie and a simple offer of friendship had grown into this beautiful, complicated, messy, wonderful life. She thought about the girl she had been, so afraid of being hurt again that she had almost missed the greatest love of her life. James returned from his travels 2 years later, ready to settle down and take over the leather-working business. He had met a young woman in Denver, and they married within a year. Carter officially retired, though he still spent time at the shop offering advice and doing small projects that interested him. Eleanor became a teacher in a larger town about 20 miles from Oroville, and she married a banker's son who appreciated her intelligence and passion for education. Thomas discovered a love of horses and began working at the livery stable, eventually buying it when the owner retired. The grandchildren came, 6 in total over the years. Carter and Victoria's house filled with the sound of young voices and laughter. They took their role as grandparents seriously, offering love and wisdom and the kind of patient attention that came from experience. Uncle Thomas passed away when Victoria was 48, and Aunt Margaret followed 2 years later. At Margaret's funeral, Victoria stood by the grave and thought about their complicated relationship. It had never been easy, but in the end, there had been respect and a grudging affection. Victoria was grateful that they had made peace before the end. The store passed to Sarah, who had worked there faithfully for all those years. She ran it efficiently and kindly, and Victoria was glad it was in good hands. As Carter and Victoria entered their 60s, they slowed down but never stopped. Carter still did small leather working projects that interested him. Victoria continued teaching for several more years before finally retiring at 65, passing the school to a young woman who reminded her of herself at that age, full of passion and idealism. They spent their days gardening, reading, visiting with their children and grandchildren. They took slow walks through the cottonwood grove, their steps more careful now but their conversations just as rich. They sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, grateful for every day they had together. On their 40th anniversary, their entire family gathered for a celebration. It was a warm day in late April, and the yard was full of people, 3 generations of Pattersons laughing and talking and sharing food. Victoria looked around at all these lives that had sprung from her and Carter's love, and she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. James brought out a guitar and started playing, and people began singing. Carter took Victoria's hand and pulled her into a slow dance on the grass. Their children and grandchildren watched with smiles. 40 years, Carter said, his voice softer now with age but still steady. And I still fall more in love with you every day. You are not supposed to still say romantic things at our age, Victoria teased. We are supposed to be old and practical and boring. I will never be practical about loving you. That would be impossible. They danced until the song ended, and then they danced through another one. Victoria felt her heart so full it seemed it might burst. Full of love for this man who had kept his promise all those years ago, who had been her friend always, through every joy and every sorrow. As the sun began to set and their family started heading home, Victoria and Carter stood on their porch, waving goodbye. When everyone had gone and it was just the two of them again, they sat in their rocking chairs, holding hands across the space between them. "Thank you," Victoria said quietly. "For what? For being my friend when I told you my heart was spoken for waiting patiently until I was ready to love again, for building this beautiful life with me." Carter squeezed her hand. "Thank you for letting me. Thank you for being brave enough to take a chance on me, even when you were afraid." They sat in the gathering darkness, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something that would outlast them both. Their love story had started with a lie and a promise, and it had become a truth that shaped everything that came after. Years passed, gentle and slow. Carter and Victoria grew older, their steps slower, their memories sometimes foggy, but their love for each other never dimmed. They still took walks through the cottonwood grove when the weather was nice, though they did not go as far as they once had. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, still held hands, still talked about everything and nothing. When Carter was 72, he fell ill with pneumonia. Victoria sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, reading to him, telling him stories from their life together. Their children took turns visiting, bringing the grandchildren to say goodbye. On a quiet morning in October, Carter opened his eyes and looked at Victoria with perfect clarity. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me," he said. "Being your friend, being your husband, being your partner in this life, it was all more than I ever deserved." "You deserved everything good," Victoria said through her tears, "and you gave me everything I ever needed. Promise me you will keep living, really living, even after I am gone. Promise me you will not just wait for your own death. I promise. But only if you promise to wait for me, wherever you are going. I do not want to spend eternity without you." Carter smiled, that gentle smile that had captured her heart so many years ago. "I will wait. I will always wait for you." He died that afternoon peacefully, with Victoria's hand in his and their children gathered around. Victoria felt like part of her soul had been torn away, leaving a wound that would never fully heal. But she had promised him she would keep living, and she intended to keep that promise just as he had kept all the promises he had ever made to her. Victoria lived for another 8 years. She spent that time with her family, teaching her grandchildren to read, telling stories about their grandfather, making sure they knew the kind of man he had been. She visited the Cottonwood Grove often, sitting on the old flat rock and talking to Carter as if he could hear her, and maybe he could. She never remarried. Carter had been the love of her life, and she had no desire to try to replace what they had shared. But she was not lonely. She was surrounded by love, by children and grandchildren who adored her, by friends who had known her for decades, by a community that valued her contributions. On a spring morning, 3 days after what would have been her and Carter's 48th anniversary, Victoria passed away in her sleep. Her children found her in her bed, a peaceful expression on her face, clutching a photograph of Carter in her hands. They buried her next to Carter in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Oroville. The entire town turned out for the funeral, testimony to the impact she had made through her years of teaching and kindness. Her children and grandchildren stood around the grave, celebrating a life well lived, a love that had shaped generations. Years later, Victoria and Carter's great-grandchildren would visit that grave, placing flowers and listening to stories about the couple who had loved each other so completely. They would hear about how their great-grandfather had offered friendship when their great-grandmother's heart was guarded, how that friendship had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The story became part of the family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories start not with passion but with patience, not with grand gestures but with simple kindness, not with demands but with the quiet promise of friendship, always. And in that cottonwood grove where two people first walked together and learned to trust each other, where promises were made and kept, where a friendship became a romance that changed two lives forever, the trees continued to grow, their branches reaching toward the sky, their roots deep and strong, lasting far longer than any single human life, but holding the memory of a love that had been just as enduring, just as true.